Hello everyone, welcome to another Daily Muppet, where I try to bring you the latest news, cover what's happening, and keep you in the loop. So I wanted to first start on a little bit of a different note on some things we've talked about in recent videos that have been confirmed now, so we can kind of reorient on everything that's been discussed and what's happening. Number one is Ronaldo staying. Last week we spoke about how Ronaldo would be likely to stay for another year, regardless of what happens. And last Friday we got the report from James Ducker, The Telegraph, that he is expected to fulfill his contract and see out another season, regardless of what happens in Europe, that there's some confidence in the appointment of a permanent manager moving forward. So he should be sticking around. Makes things a little bit easier in terms of not needing necessarily two strikers next season, but that does not change the plans for the move to add an additional likely young striker to the table. James Garner returning on loan and factoring into next season. We talked about that. There was a report from Samuel Luckhurst, or it was in a Q&A, where he said he should be back with the first team over summer and getting a chance to work with the team and work with the club and to improve and impress upon this summer. We had reports earlier that we were looking at Harry Kane. This we've talked about already, but that there were some reports that we'd be looking back at a move for Harry Kane this summer. And as we had said, they had been exploring the potential for offering players plus cash for Harry Kane. I don't believe that there's much to say on this deal, except that it's something they're looking at and could still happen, or could still at least be explored, very much depending on how the season ends, what happens, the manager situation, all of that. The next bit is that Dean Henderson is likely to go. Today, Fabrizio Romano tweeted that he wants to be a starter next season. Newcastle are interested, and we'll see if they're going to let him go this summer. You also had reports this week they were looking at 2 or 3 backup keepers, one from Sevilla, another one in England, and then there was discussion over potentially triggering De Gea's contract extension to 2024. So quite obviously, they're looking at backup keepers in the case that Dean Henderson moves on to another club. This is one thing I'd like to discuss that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I personally like David De Gea. I think he's a good keeper. I think he's an excellent shot stopper. But in terms of style, this is where I get concerned about the club moving forward and the decisions they're making. If they're going to get Ten Hag, and it's true of Pochettino too, but if they're going to get Ten Hag, for argument's sake, how does De Gea fit into that? Ten Hag's style requires a very high line from the back. His goalkeeper has been reportedly played like almost between the center backs, way off his line, and stylistically De Gea couldn't be further from a Ten Hag keeper. So how is he supposed to put that in place if De Gea is the keeper there next season? These are the concerns I have about United moving forward, whether or not they're going to make the right decisions with personnel to fit and actually help the manager implement a style, whoever it is. It would be the same for Pochettino if he were to play. He could maybe get by with a little bit more of a stuck keeper, but he still would also prefer someone who comes out and claims crosses, especially something that Hugo Lloris was very good at Tottenham. Last bit was Paul Mitchell wanted to discuss. Months ago, we talked about potentially Paul Mitchell becoming an option for the deputy director of football, and he was pictured with Rangnick a few weeks ago at a youth under-23s game, I believe. Then there's reports in the last few days that he's going to be leaving Monaco, and United are currently looking for a deputy director of football. There's even a report about an ex-Liverpool coach or something recently, just today, about that he might be in the running. Paul Mitchell is one I would absolutely keep an eye on, because he would be probably the best addition that they could make to the club this year. An incredible eye for talent, analytics, actually picking out good targets and things like that. So that's one to look for, that there could be something in that. Moving on to transfers. The latest on Declan Rice, there's not really been anything new, although what I've been hearing is that more and more, as West Ham go further in the Europa League, or if they won it, we talk about that on the podcast, there would really be no chance of Declan Rice. It's difficult. I think it's really difficult. But as we've discussed before, with Chelsea's situation, a player like Aurelien Tchouameni may become much more available, where he seemed nailed on to Chelsea prior, and that was one I would definitely keep an eye on for the future. Could be a much better price, could be available, and could potentially even fit into managers' plans better. I don't think... One of the things I will say, with the change in the structure and Ole moving on and all of that, is one thing that will change is I think the club are much more willing to move on from that first target to later targets, or to alternate targets, rather than fixating on one. One of the hallmarks under Ole was, unfortunately, that they would fixate on a single target and then have trouble getting anybody else, and moving on and end up not signing anyone rather than moving on to alternate targets. I don't think that'll be the case anymore, and that would be one that might apply to Declan Rice specifically. Today we found out that Paolo Dubal is leaving Juventus on a free. That's been coming for a while, I believe, and I wouldn't lose sight of it. Obviously, it's a player the club have looked at in the past. He'd probably be interested in going to England, and we'll see what happens. There could be other things linking him to the club, obviously, in the future. And the same with Ousmane Dembele from Barcelona. A lot of links to United, probably leaving Barcelona this summer, probably. We'll see if something changes. I don't think they can afford the wages he's asking for, and keep an eye on that. The other player I've been told to keep an eye on is Serge Gnabry. I don't know much about his situation. I was just sent a message before this to keep an eye on that as well. I feel like we get linked to him often. I think he's running lower on his contract with Bayern, and if he doesn't re-sign, then there might be something to look for there. Once again, on Araujo, I want to discuss that simply because there's a bunch more reports today about Araujo, that there's a bid and all of that, and I don't think that's the case. But as I keep saying, just keep an eye on it. If he does not re-sign, if Barcelona cannot up their offer to him, then he might be looking to get a move to get the wages he wants. Okay? Now the last thing I want to talk about is the structure and the manager situation. And I just want to touch on something first with regards to this discussion. There's been an enormous amount of pushback, criticism, whatever you call it, in the comments and on the different social media channels and things like that with regards to the whole manager discussion. And I think a lot of people don't want to, or don't, which is fine, believe what I'm telling you on this and what I've said on this. So I want to address that, because first, I would never insist that anybody believe anything I say in these videos or pass along, that you have to believe it, okay? It's information. I'm passing along to you what I hear for you to evaluate for yourself. However, a lot of the information that I get at this stage, this long in the community with how things have grown, a lot of it is coming from people in this area especially. If I told you their names, you would know who they are, is where I hear a lot of this information. So I'll just leave it at that on that point. Now, if I'm passing along something, you have to also understand that that means someone around United believes that information to be true and has passed it along, and you can evaluate it for yourself. There are different perspectives at United, and there are different viewpoints at United of what's going on right now. So, for example, what I talked about before was the role of Ralf Rangnick at United, how he wasn't that involved in the decision-making, how his job was coaching this season, and it has not been decided beyond that. So I'll talk about that in a second. I've obviously also talked about Pochettino, how they admire him for his time before PSG, for what he did at Southampton, Spurs, Espanyol, etc. And obviously there's been a lot of reports both ways with this, with Ten Hag, with all of that. But I want to cover something so it helps in looking at this situation and evaluating it, because otherwise you can get very agitated when news doesn't necessarily match up with what you think is going on. And if I say something that doesn't match up with what one person says is going on, and vice versa. So right now you have, as of today, somebody else in the media who's heard basically exactly what I have been saying. And that doesn't mean it's true, but I'll address that in a moment. Melissa Reddy, who formerly worked for The Independent, is a very, very reliable journalist for Liverpool. Okay, she recently joined Sky Sports and has been appointed just now as the senior journalist for Northwest England. Now, why that is relevant is it was previously held by James Cooper, who was one of the only reliable journalists at Sky Sports for Manchester United. He was very much up there. When he talked, you should listen. He was very reliable, very good journalist. But Melissa Reddy is the Sky Sports journalist for Northwest England at this point in time. And it's a little bit similar in some ways. If you can just bear in mind and maybe keep an open, an open mind on it, because a lot of people are going to discredit her right off the bat as not being a United journalist. David Ornstein used to be a tier 1 for Arsenal. His news on United was non-existent or hit or miss. And when he moved into a different role, he became a reporter on a lot more clubs and became one of the most reliable reporters on all clubs, where he used to be just for Arsenal. So it's something that over time would be worth paying attention to, but that immediately it would be silly to completely discount. So I just want to read this out to you, and then we can discuss it again in a moment. All right, here's the salient points on this with regards to what we've talked about before. It says Ralph Rangnick's Man United consultancy role not as clear as Mauricio Pochettino and Erik ten Hag lead the shortlist. And this is what it says. Manchester United have still not internally outlined the nature of Ralph Rangnick's consultancy role, but Sky Sports News has been told it's not envisaged to be very hands-on. No meetings have taken place as yet with the interim manager regarding the design of his future position, which comes into effect on June 1. United's hierarchy took the decision to put strategic planning on hold to allow Rangnick full focus on trying to salvage the season through coaching. As such, even the basics of the agreement, like where the German would be based, have not materialized. Okay, so they're saying they've had zero discussion about what his role is beyond this season outside of consultant. And then it says this, and this is important, but his core expertise, structurally overhauling a club and implementing sustainable, successful methodology, has so far gone unused. And then it says, if we go down, Ralph Rangnick, highly unlikely to become sporting director. Sources have intimated his role in all probability will be centered around sharing insights on innovation, scouting, and linking the club with bright football minds rather than fundamentally altering their setup. It was highlighted that consultancy is, in its essence, suggests separation and independence. United are set to lean on Rangnick's in-depth knowledge of the squad and what is required to build a strong collective for a progressive on-pitch identity. So there you go, talking about what we discussed in the video about what Fletcher and Ralph are actually doing at United. They are there to evaluate the club, the squad specifically, and build a strong collective for a progressive on-pitch identity. Here's how we want to play. Here are the players who fit it. Here's who don't. That's what he's there to do right now. That's what I've said. That's what's being said here. So let's keep going on for just a moment because there's a few more things. The analysis the interim manager provides on the squad will stretch well beyond the tactical and technical to drill down into United can improve recruitment not only in a stylistic sense but a character-wise too. However, reports he is heavily involved in the decision-making process over the club's permanent manager are incorrect. Rangnick has done what has been asked of him, which is to concentrate on coaching. Okay? It's about as explicit as it can be that he is not involved in these decision makings. He's not involved in the hierarchy. He's just coaching and evaluating the squad. Now, again, I want to go back to this. I've said this. Someone else has said this. That doesn't mean you have to believe it. But where did they hear it from? Where did it come from? That's the important point. Because if you're seeing conflicting information, what you should believe is that somebody is hearing it from somewhere and somebody's hearing it for another. And that means that there is conflicting ideas even within where it's coming from. Then there's a few more things beyond that with regards to the actual manager. And again, people have given me a very hard time about talking about how Pochettino is being judged for pre-PSG and what was going on there. And you may not believe that, but this is what it says. Here's what it says specifically. The Argentine would not require an adjustment to the league to a club of such scale or even having to pit his wits against Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp. Pochettino is seen as the concrete choice to rival Manchester City, Liverpool, and Tuchel's Chelsea, given he stacked up well to the former two while on severely restricted resources at Tottenham. and here's the important part, his work at Spurs, Southampton, and Espanyol have been given more attention than the spell at Paris Saint-Germain, where the problem has not been the manager, as successes of Carlo Ancelotti, Unai Emery, and Tuchel after departing have proven. United are aware Ten Hag is the popular choice, and the Mark Overmars scandal has made it easier to prize him from Ajax. However, there remains question marks over how he would function in a completely different structure and at a club of the size, stature, and unrelenting pressure and attention as United. So, all I'm saying here is that's basically word for word what I've been telling you for weeks, if not months, on this situation. And it's said from Melissa Reddy, the Northwest reporter for Sky Sports. So whether it's true or not entirely, and whether that's what happens, you have it from somebody who has sources, who has contacts, who has a history as a proven journalist with real sources for certain clubs, who's now hearing that from someone that is supposedly from the club to Sky Sports. So that's the reality of the situation. Somebody is hearing that, somebody is saying that, somebody at United believes that to be the case, while other people believe something else. So you have a little bit of a situation here where one hand is doing one thing and one hand is doing the other. It's not to insist that either one is true, but that there may be a little bit of a disconnect and still discussion at United about which is the case and where things go from here. Okay, so keep that in mind. I think this is potential to get a little bit messy given there is a disconnect. I hope it's resolved as quickly as we all want it to, and as it's been reported that it could. But it may not be. And if it isn't, then it isn't. And I will continue to share any updates that I have as we move forward and see if we can figure out exactly what's going on once a decision is finally made, as at the moment it does appear that there's a little bit of a disconnect within United on what's happening. Okay? So again, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on, and I'll see you in the next video.